Happy New Year's, legends. It's officially 2025 and it's my first session back on the wing for this year. Unfortunately, it's the 14th of Jan, so we're already 2 weeks into the year and I haven't managed to get out in the water yet, but super excited to get in a cracking session today after work. It's been an absolute sprint to the start of the year. Bit of family time and then kicking off our first big event for Flow State Film Co. So if you haven't seen, my partner and I have been doing some videography and photography work, and yeah, we kicked it off with an event down in Torquay at Hell's Bells. A whole bunch of fun. Go check it out on Instagram. And then now just back to work, back into the routine, and yeah, just finding some time to get out in the water after work finally. So it's looking like an absolute cracker of a session, like always. Nice big southerly being blowing for a bit of the day. Threatening to go a little bit east, but hopefully swings to the west a bit more, and so that it's a little bit more consistent for us today. I'm keen to pick up on where I left off from last year in pushing to get a bit faster around the racetrack, so just sort of simulating some race sessions. And yeah, with Wingfoil Nationals in sort of 2-3 weeks, it's right up the priority list in terms of what I'm working on. So today's session should be plenty of fun, just dialing in transitions and pushing that speed limit. Outside of that, the PPC M1R that I'm hopefully gonna get on before the Wing Nationals, it's looking a bit touch and go whether they'll get them here before the Nationals, so we'll see how we go. Otherwise, I think it'll be a strike 5.5 for when sort of under 15-18 knots, and then I'll move to the M1X for when it gets windier, if that's the case. So yeah, super keen to get on the M1R. Yeah, just start learning about these twin skin wings and what they offer. So really excited to make that video and to put some time into that wing. Outside of that, just really stoked to get back out in the water. Really looking forward to it. So I guess I'll go get set up and I'll catch you guys out there. Well, epic first session back. Yeah, couldn't have asked for a better breeze. It's like, I reckon maybe 16 knots when I first got out. Sort of, yeah, flicking between south-southwest. But yeah, it was really nice out in the water. We're gonna try something a little bit different for 2025. You might have noticed I've been working a little bit with Waterspeed and been finding a lot of value out of using their app to dig into the Garmin data. So instead of entirely going off feel, I'm going to jump into the Waterspeed app and dig into the data and see how that aligns with what I felt during today's session. So let's jump over there. So we've made it to the Waterspeed app and we're going to have a look at what we can learn from today's session. So before we dive deep into Waterspeed, I just wanted to show my process for getting this data. This is the Phoenix 6. I had the Phoenix 5. The only reason I upgraded was because I lost it over Christmas when the band snapped. So yeah, Phoenix 6 does everything you need. You can get them cheap on Facebook Marketplace. This was like $300, pretty handy. But yeah, to get the data, I just come into an app called Race Countdown. So this is just on the Connect IQ store. When I want to do like simulating a race, which is what I did today quite a bit. Just press start, and then you got your 3-minute countdown. It'll buzz on each minute. It'll buzz in the last 10 seconds, and you'll be ready to go. And then what this does is once you're finished with your session, you can pause it, exit and save data, and I do that every time. And then that will save the race separately. And then I come back into the app and get ready for another start. There is a function where you can stay within the app, reset it and go again, but I prefer to do it this way. And then for just my general sessions, I just have an app called Wingfoil. It's literally just a custom activity where I've just set up the screens and just gives me some basic data on the watch itself, but it's nothing fancy, same as any Apple Watch or anything like that. So that's how I get the data. It syncs across from the Garmin to the Waterspeed app. Today's data, we had a little segment on the way out from the beach, and then this is using the Race Countdown app. I did like a one lap here, and then two laps in my little race course, and then this is what I finish on. And this little segment here is the secret sauce to getting better at tacking and jibing, and will get you absolutely ready for racing. But we're going to go through what I can learn from the other little segments first, and we'll get back to that at the end. So the way I like to use the Waterspeed app, just jump into your session, set it up so you're looking into the breeze, and then you can sort of see the path that you've taken with the track. You can come in and have a look at the details. So a handy one for something like this is your average speed. Your max speed, somewhat interesting, but it's not a major in racing. And then duration of the session. And you can also come in and add the equipment that you use. So you can revisit this data down the track and compare it to some new gear that you might get in the future. The other key detail that I like to look at is the distance, because when we're talking about simulating racing, we sort of want to know two things. We want to know how fast we went on average around the track, but also what distance we traveled, because you can win a race by being the fastest and having a decent distance traveled, or you can win a race by traveling less distance than everyone else, even though you might not be as fast. So that's an interesting one to compare, especially when I've got multiple race segments like I showed before. Another interesting thing is just the number of tacks and jibes, whether you hit your lay line and made the top mark, or whether you had to dig back a few times. And yeah, the best tack speed and the best jibe speed is pretty interesting as well. Another way you can dive into this is by clicking on tacks and jibes, and then it gives you your entry and exit speed for your tacks and for your jibes. So that's pretty handy as well. These were the 1 lap sessions. So I had duration of 9 minutes, 15 seconds, a distance of 4.8 Ks. If I wanted to do this really accurately, I'd actually jump in and trim off the start, just so I get the distance for the actual racing segment. So once the 3-minute countdown was done and I'd actually crossed the start line, that's when I want my distance to count. But for this sake, we're just having a look. So we can see for this first session, I had a duration of 9 minutes and 15 seconds. For this next 1 lapper, I had 9 minutes, 10 seconds. I traveled 4.8 kilometers in this one and 4.6 in that one. And then my average speed, 16.4 and 16.9 knots. So interesting that even though on average I was going faster in this first session or this first simulation of a race, it was actually slightly slower. So 9 minutes 15 versus 9 minutes 10. And that's because I've traveled further distance. I've gone 4.8 kilometers as opposed to 4.6. So that extra 200 meters over the course of
a 1 lap race could be the difference between coming first or coming second, or coming first and coming 10th, depending how tight the racing is. One thing before we jump to the 2-lap data, the feature that I've shown in the past still holds up, and that's the compare feature. So you can click compare, select the 2 sessions, and then hit compare down the bottom. And what that does, it'll overlay your tracks over the top of each other. It will give you some key metrics, which is handy. So you can see total duration, 901 versus 906. Gives you the wind segment in that time. So 10 knots versus 11 knots. I mean, take that with a grain of salt, because this is just coming from wind data that's available and not necessarily like the super localized wind conditions that you had in that small patch of water where you were sailing. Gives me my average speed, gives me my average pace, whole bunch of stuff. Distance, which was interesting, breaks your best speeds down. And one thing that could be interesting is the heart rate. So on the track where I sailed slightly less distance but was slightly faster, I actually worked a bit harder to achieve that. So maybe there was a bit more pumping in that race versus just cruising along upwind, maybe at a lower angle, going a bit faster. And the one other thing I like to look at when I'm doing this compare situation is you can sort of look for parallel lines. So the grayed out track is the second selection, and the coloured in one is the first race that I chose. If we scroll through a bit, we can see that that's the start segment, and then that's the first upwind. Well, it's a 1-lap race, so that is the upwind. And we can compare that to our upwind angle here on this line versus this line is something interesting to look at. So for me, I look at this and see that in this first track that I selected, I've travelled a lower angle upwind versus this one, which would make me think that I've done more distance in the first track versus the second. But the catch was, in this one, I've actually port started, and in the other track I started on starboard, so that could have been the make or break factor. But as I said, to dig into this really accurately, I'd come in and on both tracks, and you'd trim out the start segment. So I look for there, that's where I've started. So we could say that bit where we start to go there, I'd probably put a start point there and then go all the way to the end of the race, which is where I drive and come around the mark down here. And I'd probably call that the end point. And then what you do is you crop track, and that would remove the start and the end and just leaves you with the racing portion. And that'll give you more of an accurate distance and a more accurate average speed. And then it saves as that crop track, which you can see it's taken about 3 minutes, just a bit over 3 minutes off the time because of the 3-minute countdown for the start. And then it's also taken a bit of time off the end as well. It's bumped my average speed up, and it's bumped my distance up as well. Okay, on to the 2-lappers, same sort of thing. So we could do the same comparison where we pick the two tracks, overlay them on top of each other, or we could crop out little segments. But the one thing that I wanted to see from this session was I wanted to understand how I performed in a 1-lap versus a 2-lap race, and how I performed on the first lap versus the second lap, just to see how much sort of fatigue creeped in. So there's a few things. You can do a splits analysis, you could review your tacks and jibes. So this is probably the simplest way to do it without having to crop out segments. It just does each kilometre as you go. It might not be as accurate because you're not comparing the same segment to the same segment in the racetrack, but we can see our average speed 17.8, 17.4, 21, 19.5, 16.6, 19.1, 21.6. So no clear trend there. I was sort of looking for a downwards trend to see if my performance dropped off as I went. But what we can do, we can also look at the graph in the first lap versus the second lap. So the blue line being my speed, change that to direction. Blue line being my speed, so we can see it's our first upwind. Our peaks aren't as high as do our downwind. So this leg here, I've actually on the graph you can see, I'll bring it a bit closer, these peaks, this little section here is probably not quite as high as this section here, which was the other upwind. So probably backed off a little bit in that little segment, but the downwind looks quite similar. So that's just the tip of the iceberg on how you can use the Waterspeed app to gain a whole bunch more insight into your sessions on the water. And now, as promised, I'm going to go through the drill that has significantly improved my consistency, my maneuverability, keeping me on foil, all these great things. So this looks like an absolute mess, but basically I've set myself the challenge of, at the end of each session, I want to do 10 mark roundings turning left, 10 mark roundings turning right. So in here we can see the mark is somewhere in here. We can even jump in, turn the satellite on, and this is going to expose me a little bit. We can see that the mark's that tiny dot there, and yeah, some mark roundings are closer than others. The color of the track indicates the speed as well, so some I've come in a bit faster, some I've come in a bit slower. Another thing we can do is we turn on partial track, and then that way it helps us see a bit better. So we can see a few of the runs that I did this way before I started turning around and going the opposite directions. As we go, we come in, we turn around the mark, tack, come back, turn around the mark, and I just repeat that 10 times. So we can see this one was shocking. I probably got caught off guard with the jibe, coming down a bit of wind swell, ended up super wide, not ideal. But yeah, that is an absolute weapon of a drill to improve your jibing and to improve your tacking. You'll be able to jump in here as well, click on tacks and jibes, and you can see entry and exit speeds and your average speed during each jibe, during each tack, and then you could check that against the track that you traveled and see what was the entry speed on the more tight and close roundings versus the ones where you got caught off guard, maybe you entered really fast and you just weren't prepared for the turn. And then yeah, as you do this more and more, you'll be able to see an improvement over time as you become more accurate at rounding the mark, but also being able to round the mark at faster and faster speeds too. Cool little drill. I love to chuck that on at the end of each session and just get a bit more out of my wing foiling. That's how I use the Waterspeed app. If you haven't given it a go, jump on the App Store, pick it up and have a look. I also have a discount code, which I'll put in the description below. If you want to sign up for the Pro version, which gives you access to all these extra analytics, then yeah, feel free to use the code in the description. I've been really enjoying working with these guys. They're super open to suggestions on how to improve their app as well, so it's only going to get better as time goes on. Just really appreciate the support that they provide me and the channel so that I can get better videos out to you guys. That's about it for me, so thanks for watching and I'll catch you guys in the next one.